Hello everyone. Welcome to the 2014 IROP Symposium. My name is Hannah Waller, and I'm going to be presenting on the research I did this past summer in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I apologize for not being able to be there in person, but I'm currently pursuing a Peace Studies program at Lancaster University in the UK for the fall semester. The IROP grant I received helped me to gain valuable experience in the field of human rights, and I am hoping to continue to expand my knowledge through this Peace Studies program and then go on to graduate school in the field of conflict resolution. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy my presentation. The title of my research project is Transitional Justice in Post-Conflict Societies, a Case Study of Bosnia-Herzegovina. My UNH mentor is Professor Mary Malone in the Political Science Department, and my foreign mentor is Vahidin Omanovic, the co-founder and director of the Center for Peacebuilding in Bosnia-Herzegovina. If you're wondering where Bosnia-Herzegovina is, don't worry, that's the general reaction I get. So, just for reference, here's a map. Bosnia-Herzegovina, or BIH, is located in southeastern Europe. This summer, I lived in Sanski Most, a small town in northwestern Bosnia. Here's a picture of me next to the town seal. To start, just a little background on Bosnia-Herzegovina and why I chose to go there. From 1991 to 1995, a series of secessionist wars tore apart the former Yugoslavia. When the wars finally ended in November 1995, it would stand as the most violent event Europe had experienced since World War II. While the Dayton Agreement managed to put an end to the violence, it actually froze ethnic divisions in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Today, Christian Orthodox Serbs, Roman Catholic Croats, and Muslim Bosniaks struggle to live together in the multi-ethnic country. These ethno-religious groups are increasingly segregated, and the fact that each group feels like they lost the war in '95 only increases the risk of future conflict. I wanted to look at different aspects of the post-conflict society and gauge whether or not the government had done enough to bridge the gaps between the ethno-religious groups. The most important data I felt like I gathered from the interviews I conducted, which I'll explain more about in a moment, are the raw stories and quotes that I heard. I've interspersed a few of the most powerful quotes throughout this presentation, but more will be included in my article for the UNH Inquiry Journal, which I hope to publish later this spring. Recent events underscore the importance of my research topic, as ethnic tensions are still apparent in everyday life. The role of government, or rather, the lack of a government, is a huge part of why the country is struggling to move forward. An example of this was shown in the first 2 weeks of my time in Bosnia, when the most devastating floods it has seen in over a century forced over 1 million Bosnians to evacuate their homes. I was fortunate enough that the flood started a week prior to my arrival, so by the time I got there, most of the floodwaters had receded, and now it was just time for damage control. It was a bit of a change in plans, but I ended up doing humanitarian aid work with the Center for Peacebuilding for the first few weeks and put off my interviews until later. On one hand, it was incredible to see how a town with so few resources could come together to rebuild, but it was shocking to see the lack of government involvement in the entire crisis. Most of the aid money that was coming from neighboring countries was merely pocketed by politicians, and it was up to the NGOs to take care of the people. It was painful to see people who had lost everything in the war, returned home and rebuilt it, and now lost everything again in the floods. After the floods, life in Sanski Most pretty much returned to normal. It was a quiet, beautiful little town, but the underlying sadness and tension from the war was never far away. One day would be a fun concert for families in the local park, and the next would be a burial procession for 284 bodies found in a nearby mass grave. It was hard to keep up with the shifting emotions, and know that this is how they have to live, with this constant reminder of loss. One of the most dominant themes I found in my research was how shocked the Muslim Bosniaks were when the Catholic Croats and the Christian Serbs began killing. As you can see in this quote, one interviewee compared it to lambs being prepared for slaughter. My research project was centered on the themes of truth, memory, and justice, and their roles in rebuilding a post-conflict society. It also looked at the current transitional justice strategy in BIH, which, as it turns out, is largely a result of independent NGOs such as the Center for Peacebuilding, and really had nothing to do with the government. I spent 9 weeks conducting interviews and research in Sanski Most with my mentor, Vahidin, who is the director of SIM, Centar za izgradnju mira, or the Center for Peacebuilding, in Sanski Most. This is a picture of me with Vahidin and his wife, Timka. My goal was to conduct 15 to 30 interviews, but after losing the first few weeks to the floods, I realized I needed to lower my goal. I ended up interviewing 17 people with the help of my close friend and translator, Diana Mrdanovic. We conducted semi-structured interviews, which were essentially a series of open-ended questions that let people tell their story or simply say yes or no, depending on whether or not they were comfortable. It was amazing how much easier the interviews became once people recognized me and knew that I was an active member of SIM in the community, and I became more than just the American. It was also much harder to get an ethnically diverse sample than I expected, because as one interviewee put it, Sanski Most was ethnically clean, and that it was 95% Muslim Bosniaks. So, that ended up being my entire sample, which meant I focused on the victim side of the war as opposed to all groups involved, but it ended up being equally as fascinating. Almost more important than my interviews was participant observation, merely living and interacting with people in Sanski Most. On days I didn't have interviews, I helped out at the Center for Peacebuilding in a variety of activities, such as helping teach English or participating in Harmonia, the interreligious choir. I also grew close to my mentor, Vahidin, and his family, and made many other friends throughout Sanski Most. As you can see on this pie chart, the overwhelming majority of people were pessimistic about Bosnia's future. This was probably one of the hardest parts of living in Sanski Most, the overwhelming feeling of apathy and hopelessness. Nearly all of the young adults my age wanted to escape and had no intention of returning to Bosnia if they could help it. This next graph shows the main themes I was hoping to look at: truth, memory, and justice, as well as one that came up often: economic prosperity or all of the above. Of the three main themes, memory ranked the lowest because many people thought that the only way to move on was to ignore the past and focus on the future. However, they still clearly wanted the truth and wanted those responsible to be put behind bars. This is unlikely because after 20 years, most of the perpetrators are still free and walking the streets, largely due to the corrupt government and judicial system. Several interviewees thanked me for caring about Bosnia and for wanting to figure out the truth. Their belief was that the rest of the world had forgotten them, and that everyone just assumes that the Dayton Accord solved everything. Yes, Dayton did stop the violence, but it certainly set the country up to fail in the future. This word cloud is the series of responses I got in answer to the question, what is the first word that comes to mind when I mention the war in Bosnia? This turned out to be one of the most painful questions, as one respondent said basement, because that's where she hid for 3 years, and another said hunger, because she lived off of corn flour during the war. There were times both my translator and I were speechless because of the horrific stories we heard, and the way people said them so calmly, as if this was normal. For them, it is normal. Everyone lost someone in the war, or knows someone who did. The second word cloud is a bit more positive. It is in response to the question, what does the country need in order to heal and recover from its past? Many people stress the importance of the economy, which is currently at 45% unemployment. Others thought that there would be no way to move forward unless the primarily Serb perpetrators admitted what they had done and revealed the location of the rest of the mass graves. Thousands of bodies are still missing. The final quote of this presentation is a bit ominous. Bosnians really believe that this could happen all over again in the blink of an eye. Many already have escape plans and places of refuge in preparation for another war. It's hard for me to comprehend, as I'm sure it is for many of you in this room, what it must be like to live like this. On a lighter note, I did have an incredible and very positive experience overall, even if the interviews were a bit hard to process. I was fortunate enough to even be able to travel. One of the most powerful places I saw was the Memorial and Genocide gravesite at Srebrenica, which was where the worst genocide of the war occurred. The white Muslim headstone stretched for what felt like miles, and I was the only one in the cemetery as they were preparing for the annual burial on July 11th. Each year on this date, they bury any of the remains that were discovered that year of people who were killed in Srebrenica. It was similar to the Holocaust in that once Serbs realized the war was going to end, they tried to bury the evidence by moving mass graves to various locations around the country. A very fun trip I had was to Rome, Italy for the annual International Political Psychology Conference. This was a week-long conference of scholars from all over the world who presented their research on ideologies and ideological conflict, which was directly relevant to the causes of the Bosnian War. I met many fascinating people and of course was able to explore around the city, which was amazing. About halfway through my time in Bosnia, my parents were able to visit me in Sarajevo, which was about a 6-hour bus ride from my home in Sanski Most. My dad was in Sarajevo for an Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation conference. He is a professor at Keene State College in Holocaust and Genocide Studies and also works for the Auschwitz Institute. He is a huge reason of why I chose to go to Bosnia, and he helped me connect with Vahidin and the Center for Peacebuilding. While in Sarajevo, my parents and I spent a week together taking historical tours and exploring the area. Sarajevo still has shrapnel and bomb marks on many of the buildings, a constant reminder of the siege that they went through. The city itself is breathtaking, and everyone you talk to, from a tour guide to a waiter, has a fascinating story of survival and perseverance from the war. We also took a day trip to Mostar, Bosnia, which is in the south, and has the famous Mostar Bridge. It was built during the Ottoman Empire, but was destroyed by the Serb soldiers during the war because it was an important symbol to the Bosniak people. Thankfully, it was rebuilt with the help of the United Nations and is still incredibly beautiful. None of these unforgettable experiences would have been possible without the wonderful people listed on this slide, including Mr. Dana Hamill, Mr. Frank and Mrs. Patricia Noonan, Mr. Craig and Mrs. Andrea Abbott, Mary Malone, Georgianne Murphy, Peter Ackerman, Vahidin Omanovich, Diana Mardanovich, Mevludin Rahmanovich, my dad James Waller, and of course the IROP program and the entire Hamill Center. Thank you so much to everyone who helped me get to Bosnia and helped me realize that this is undoubtedly the field I want to find my career in. Thank you for believing in me when I seem to face obstacle after obstacle in moving to a post-conflict society. Please feel free to email me with any and all questions that you may have. I apologize again for not being able to be there in person, but I look forward to being back at UNH in the spring. Thank you again for attending the IROP Symposium, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations.